They stay vigilant so we can sleep peacefully. They stand guard so we can be at rest. They put their lives on the line so we can live ours without fear. But who looks after the hero's heart? Welcome to Hero's Heart with Chaplain Dan Middlebrooks, President and CEO of Chaplaincy Care Incorporated, which according to Psalm 28:7, focuses on protecting the hearts of our heroes, our first responders. Learn more at chaplaincycare.org. And now your host, Chaplain Dan Middlebrooks.
Hey, we want to welcome you back here to Hero's Heart. I know that we started a conversation some time back about safe talk, if you'll kind of pardon the pun on that. And we began to start breaking down the SAF. Now, last week we talked about keeping the words simple, that was the S, and keeping the words agreeable. And that means that words that you may have may not always be the same words that your spouse has or that your family has. So you have to agree upon the same definition. That way you're not kind of using two rule books, which never really works for any game, especially when you talk about the most important game, and that being marriage. But today I want to focus on the F part of safe. Now I'm going to break this down into actually two sessions. When we come together, because I want you to understand that when we focus, and that's really what the F stands for, is that when we focus on two things, it's going to allow our conversation to be able to connect with our spouse, with our family members, and then even those that we may work with. Because of the fact that when we begin to consider of how we're going to be able to express some of the things that's going on inside of us. Guys, when we have a bad day, especially the difference between a bad day of a normal person. When I say normal, nowadays I use that term loosely. But when I talk about a normal person going to work, going to a 9-to-5 job, whatever may be happening on that, when they have a bad day, it may just simply be, a tire going flat or a project falling through or a really bad conversation with their boss. But you as first responders, ladies and gentlemen, when you have a bad day, that's a really bad day. That's either an accident, a wreck, a shooting, someone has been hurt or possibly even killed. There's a lot more that goes into your bad days than anything else. And that's why this conversation that we have with our families is going to be very important. But when you talk about focusing on that conversation, focusing to make the conversation safe, very first thing I need you to focus on is going to be your pitch. We're going to talk about your presentation in the next time together. But right now, I want you to focus on your pitch. That is your inflection when you're speaking. Now, if you're like I am, you don't really hear the sound of your voice that much. The only time I ever hear my sound of really my voice is when I'm listening back to one of the episodes and I'm thinking, gosh, I sound like that. Have you ever done that before? But really, when we're talking, we're used to hearing a specific type of inflection and pitch in our own mind. But the question that I have for all of us, and that's including me, is that pitch actually resonating with the person? Is it actually connecting with them, not just in their head, but in their heart? Or is it pushing them away? Is it causing some type of stress that's going to be inside of them because of how we're coming across or how that they perceive our inflections are coming across? Because our inflections can either be inviting or they can be, quite frankly, aggravating. They can be sort of like the sound of the nails on the chalkboard, for those of you that remember what chalkboards were. But it's that sound that kind of goes all the way down. It kind of starts at the base of your spine and just starts to reverberate up with all the vibrations, and you just don't like it. Because there's a skill that comes by this area of your inflection. Some of the great authors that I've seen in life talk about how the inflection of words make a huge difference because, quite frankly, the human voice has actually been one of the greatest instruments that has ever been produced, far any other instrument that could ever be crafted. Why? Because the human voice can paint words that the eyes need to see. And that's really important because as we approach people, as we talk to people, as we share with people, we've got to realize that it's not just about the words that we use. Again, that's only about 7% of actual communication. It starts about 30-some-odd% by the tone of voice. Now, I've shared this a little bit earlier, But I'm going to go deeper into that tone of voice because that really is an element that every one of us have to be sensitive to, because our tone can show, just like our eyes do, about how we are aggravated, the frustrations that come. It can come across as critical and even condemning as far as what a person is doing or how we're talking. We can either talk with a person or we can talk at a person. For those of you that don't know the difference of those two, let me give you a great example in my life. In 1987, when I left Plant City, Florida, to go to basic training, first time I'd ever left home, flying on a airplane for the first time, landing at Columbia, South Carolina, getting on the truck to go into the facility itself as far as Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And at that point, we were introduced, I'll put it that way, to Army life. And I was introduced by my drill sergeant Thompson. Now, he was about 5'8", but when he yelled, he was like 12 foot tall. I mean, this guy was just huge in his voice. And basically, we didn't really have conversations with Drill Sergeant Thompson. He just had monologues, which means he was talking at us. He was not talking with us. Have you been in conversations like that before? Or better yet, have you had conversations where you were the one talking at rather than just simply talking with? The difference between a conversation and what I would go into the feeling of an interrogation is really how you're approaching it. And you've got to be able to approach it with a tone of voice, with an inflection in your voice that is going to allow it to be softer and gentler and not as coarse and not as hard. Now, when I talk about that hard part, as far as that can come across kind of like the grating part, I do realize this, and this is true for all of us that are sitting, not only just listening to this, but the encounters that you've had, the conversations that you probably had with your families and with your spouse that just went south real fast. Keeping a watch not only on your spouse's facial expressions, guys, that's huge. You need to be able to see what's happening on their face, because that lets you know what the message is being transcribed when it gets to them. That message that their eyes give you, that their mouth gives you, that their facial expressions give you, that their arms, a lot of what we call the nonverbal cues. They're going to let you know that the small pebble you just threw at them, as far as a word, it was either going to be caught as a pebble or it was going to knock them over like the Rock of Gibraltar. Something that takes them off their feet because it has now impacted their heart. This is easier, what I call, preached than practiced, because we have to truly understand our own voice and how it comes across. So how do we do that? How do we begin to learn the pitch of our persuasive conversation or our passionate conversation that allows our spouse to know what's going on the inside of us? Because they already know that if we're going to talk to them, and again, keeping that safe talk, especially going times of trauma and traumatic events and things of that nature, they already know that you're a little high-strung at that point. They already know that you're ginned up because of what's just happened, that the heart is going, that the mind is going, that a lot of stuff is happening, and you're trying to process it and kind of put it down. But when we begin to talk to them, we need to be able to give our spouses permission. That's one of the key elements about this, understanding the focus of your pitch. We have to give our spouses permission, again, to be able to reflect back to us not just what they've heard us say, but how we said it. Now here's how we can do that. Is when we say something and we know it just did not seem to come across right. That's the moment that we need to stop and say, okay, with what I just said, how did you hear it? Not how did you take it, because that goes into perceptions, backgrounds, triggers, all these things that we go deeper into in other episodes of Hero of the Heart. But what I talk about is how did you hear me say that? Because that's going to be the clue that allows you to be able to know, okay, did this come across right or did it come across all wrong? Ladies and gentlemen, we don't now. There may be exceptions, but what I'm talking about is the over 90 some odd percent of us that we just do not intentionally mean to say something stupid. It just comes natural to us. It just sometimes things just flow out of us because of past experiences or frustration or you can put all the different excuses. Bottom line is that when we've done something like that, we can try to negate it, we can try to justify it, we can try to rationalize it, or we can get down to the point to where we realize what we've just done and take responsibility for it. That means if something comes across wrong, ask your spouse, how did you hear that? Did you hear it critical? Did you hear it condemning? Did it have a lot more growl in it? Because when we, and this is also when someone's talking to us, we have to be just as honest for them and sometimes even taken into consideration where that's coming from. Because sometimes the frustration or the aggravation or the growl and stuff will come through just because of all the emotions that are now trying to fight to get out. We can do that because when we don't take things personal, man, it is so amazing of how conversations can keep going deeper and wider and become richer in its understanding. But we have to start where we are, and they have to start with telling us how did it come across to them. If it came across hard, then maybe this is a way for you to be able to say, okay, was it my tone? Was it the pitch that I used? Was it too high? Was it too hard? Was it too intense? Just ask the question, and then don't be defensive about the answer. That's so important because when we say, hey, how can I get this better? Sometimes people get mad when you tell them how you can get it better. But we're only going to get better at our conversation to keep it safe with our spouses and with our family if we give them the permission to be able to speak back honestly to us so that we can take an honest inspection of our own words and begin to start listening to ourselves. I know that there are times that I wish that I would have been able to record maybe a conversation that I had with my wife so that I could go back and listen to the inflection of my voice. Listen to how it come across because I may not hear it. I really don't. I don't hear how it's coming across. I think I'm trying to be a little bit more bottom line up front, trying to leave the emotion out of it, become really specific in certain areas like facts and stuff, but it can come across as mechanical. It can come across as very kind of what I call Spock orientation, no emotions whatsoever. It's just in the intensity of that moment. And so I think like the rest of the world, we just have to learn what it means to be able to speak in such a way that they hear our heart as well as hear our voice. Hearing the voice opens the door for them to see our heart, but they've got to be willing to see it, not duck and cover when we begin to speak. That's why that the power of your voice is going to move a person more than just the words by which you say, because inside that pitch there will be passion. Inside pitch there will be compassion. Inside that word bank that you're about to present to them is going to be a vault of empathy or sympathy. Empathy is I feel what you feel. Sympathy is I hurt because you hurt. It is joining those things together and realizing that when we come together, it's going to allow us to be able to stand and listen to each other. It's kind of hearing, realizing that hearing, as far as with the ears, is a body sense. We got our ears to be able to hear. But actually listening is an art. Now, quick thing about art. Let me give you just a very quick breakdown of art. A-R-T. It's not art. It's art and how we develop the skills and stuff. But this art is active, reflective talking. Active, reflective talking. That's the art of the communication of focusing on your pitch. because the active part means that you are actively engaged. You're not just saying things off the cuff. You're not just saying things that are just coming to your mind because, my friends, when we speak before we think, we have already started digging a hole that we need to get out of. So it's just putting that pause to come in. The earlier episode about the power of the pause, sometimes we just need to pause for a moment to be able to take in the words, because silence is okay. And I'm going to talk about that later on in the next session. But that silence is going to be golden because it gives you the opportunity to weigh the words before you speak them, because you want to be sure that when they get to your spouse's ears, they are not a massive rock that's going to knock him or her, out of balance. So that active part means I am actively engaged. This is not on an automatic pilot. But then the reflective part is what I shared earlier. That is when we get into the part of, okay, how did you hear this? How did this come across to you? What would have made this better for me to say it to you? So, because we're going to be learning about that. That's the reflective part, because we're starting to do our own, not only self-examination, but we're allowing others to examine us as well. And the talking part is just that. Use more than just your words. Use your heart. Hey, thanks for joining me today on Heart of the Hero. And what I ask you to do is I want you to consider what we've given, because we're going to go into the part 2 of what it means to have the safe talk, the F of focusing. Because it's not just focusing on your pitch, it's focusing on your preparation for your presentation. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
You've been listening to Hero's Heart with Chaplain Dan Middlebrooks, President and CEO of Chaplaincy Care Incorporated. Learn what you can do to protect the hearts of our heroes, our first responders, at chaplaincycare.org.